Hi, and welcome to yet another episode of the Reenactors Corner. Today we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of reenacting. I mean, we are the reenacting police after all.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Reenactors Corner with Lasse and Chris. Today we're going to talk about something that was an idea for a podcast that somebody had posted on my Facebook that was do's and don'ts of reenacting. So let's take it away. How are you doing today, Lasse?
Just fine. Just fine. Had a day off. Didn't do much.
Nice.
What about you?
I had a nice weekend. Today I had to go to court to fight a speeding ticket. I got the ticket dismissed, but now it's the evening time and I can relax and unwind, and I look forward to chatting with you about some fun reenactment stuff.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of reenacting. But first, have you done anything reenactment related lately?
Well, I do something reenactment related every day. But in seriousness, not really too much. We haven't done a reenactment event since the last time we talked. We've got an event coming up that's going to be an immersion event at a private property that we have the ability to use. So I've kind of been gearing up for that, trying to do some planning, but it's coming right up, and I've probably fallen behind with the planning. And look, I mean, there's never enough time, right? I could have an event scheduled a year from now, and I would still be scrambling in the last minutes when it came time to actually do it.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. I did get some reenactment related stuff in the mail. There's a place in France that makes really high quality helmet decals that we can put a note to in the show notes. They had a 20% off sale at the beginning of the month, and I took advantage of that, and I got a new decal for one of my helmets that I use for reenacting. What about you? Speaking of money, have you bought anything new lately? Did you get anything in the mail?
Nope. But I will have to buy new boots before the Belgium events. Time is really running out.
Where are you going to get the boots from?
I have a little choice, but go to Nestov.
Okay. Yeah, that'll get you the boots in time, sure.
Yeah.
Well, when you get them, we should talk about them on the podcast, because I'd be curious to hear your review of them. And I know that there have been different runs of Nestov boots over time. They've, I think, improved over time. So it'd be interesting to hear about how you feel about the boots that you get.
Yeah, certainly. I got the more expensive Leder Arsenal boots now, but they're really starting to break. So I do really want to have new ones for the Belgium event.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that it's. I mean, look, they're boots. They weren't made to last forever, right? So even if the boot is identical to the World War II German Army boot, it's not going to last for the remainder of your reenactment career. I'm in a position now where I'm going to be buying later Arsenal boots, because the boots that I have that I've been wearing, which were made by Robert Land, who doesn't make boots anymore, those boots days are numbered. Those boots don't have very many events left in them at all. So
That's how it is.
I got on the list for later Arsenal, and hope that those boots will get me maybe 5 years or something, and then it'll be time for something new.
Yeah, mine are 5-6 years old now.
Cool.
So,
well, that's
yeah.
I would be satisfied. I would be, if I can get 5 years out of a pair of reenactment boots, I'm satisfied with that.
Oh yeah, I'm satisfied with it, but I don't think the Nestov boots will last that long. But if they last 2 years, I'll be happy.
I know some guys who reenact a lot, who bought expensive boots and had them last only a very short time. And I know other guys who bought Stern boots, which is like an inferior and very cheap type of boot that's no longer available. And these guys have been reenacting for 10 years with these boots that for most people only lasted a few weeks or months. So you never really know. Sometimes
Yeah.
maybe you'll get lucky.
Yeah, I never do, so maybe this time I will.
Yeah. I mean, a broken clock is right twice a day or something, they say. So.
Reminds me, I also need a new clock for the Belgium event. Thanks for that.
Like a clock.
Yeah, a watch.
I have a little folding German-made like alarm clock thing that I use for reenacting that I got in an antique store, and I think it's probably from the early 50s. I've seen some very similar ones that say "Made in Germany, U.S. occupied zone." So I imagine the same pattern existed in the 30s and 40s as well. But that's a very handy thing. It doesn't keep perfect time, but it's good enough. And if I set it in the evening and I set an alarm, it can wake me up so that we can start our day in the morning.
Yeah, I want one of those too. We'll see what I get.
So with that, I think we should jump in to our do's and don'ts. And I made like a little bit of a list here that I'm going to be working off of, and Les, I'm sure you're going to have ideas too. We could talk about this stuff, but I wanted to say from the outset, to be clear, this isn't like Chris's rules of reenacting. These aren't like the most crucial things that I could think of. It's just kind of some tips that I think that are based on obviously my personal experiences, and other people may have totally the opposite experience, which is fine. But these are things that some of them I think are very important. Some of them maybe are less important or even a little bit silly, but they're just things that I think are worth talking about, making some food for thought. So let's just start with the do's, right? Like start on kind of a positive note. So the first thing that I tell people, and this is one of the important ones. So these aren't in any real specific order, but I put this one first because I think it's very important. And that's, if you're going to reenact World War II, you should try to be your own expert rather than taking input from other people. I mean, take input from other people, sure, but you need to have your own stock of information. You need to have your own base of understanding so that when other information crosses your path, you can kind of work that into your own view, and you can maybe think, okay, well, this is totally not in line with anything I've ever heard before, so I'm going to take this one with a grain of salt. Or just like with uniforms and stuff, like on a basic level, material culture stuff. You could say, well, all right, who makes the best bread bag? And you're going to get 10 different answers from 10 different reenactors. Or maybe there's even one that more people recommend than others, but it's better if you know what makes a bread bag correct. So if you have studied photographs of bread bags and learned about the different models of bread bags, learned about the different variants of each model of bread bag, and maybe handled some originals as well, so you could get a feel for the range of materials that were used and what kinds of hardware were used at different periods of the war. And so you don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can look at a bread bag and make your own decision about it based on your own expertise. And that's, I think, something that we all should aspire to. I never stop learning, and I'm not putting myself out there as an expert on anything really. But I have enough of an expertise that I can feel really confident when I'm evaluating a source or when I'm evaluating a reproduction item, that I can come at it with some kind of understanding from a base level. And that's going to help me a lot more than just blindly trusting reenactor consensus opinions, which sadly often are just not really worth anything.
Definitely. It's like, don't just buy stuff because someone told you to buy it, but understand why you're buying that specific item.
Totally. Yeah, it's and to me it extends, of course, beyond just the uniform stuff, where it's like it's, if you want to know, say, what was a typical daily schedule for German army soldiers in barracks, that's information that you can find yourself through research, through looking at translated manuals, and maybe finding some original documentation of what a daily plan looked like for soldiers, on barracks duty. So you can say for yourself, okay, we're going to do a barracks event, and this is how we're going to do it. Instead of just reaching out and getting information kind of from the reenactor groupthink hive mind, which some of that information is going to be good, and then some of that information is going to be repeated stuff that people just made up, right? Like, or stuff based on nothing, or things that are based on modern military service, or other things that don't apply. So being your own expert that's one of the most important things, I think, one of the most important skills that a reenactor can have. More important than having the right kind of helmet, more important than having the right kind of uniform. It's what you have in your mind. It's the understanding, the knowledge base that you've built for yourself that's going to help you the most to be the most real and to get the most out of it. And I'm sure, Lasse, you must have found this as well when you started your group. I mean, being the only group in the country that you're in, obviously you didn't have a lot of local people that you could turn to for information. So you guys had to get that information yourself and come to your own understandings about things.
Absolutely, and we also often fell into the hive mind trap, but we became our own experts, so we found other ways, more correct ways.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I never foolishly repeated information that I read online that turned out to be fake either. This is something that it's happened to me. I think it happens to everybody at some point, but only through your own study and research can you ever really figure out where you've gone wrong and separate it out and determine what's real.
Exactly.
The next item on my list about do's is take inspiration from stuff outside of World War II German reenacting. So that's going to take some explanation on my part. I know that people, including myself, like when I got into reenacting, I wanted to know everything that there was about reenacting. And prior to every event, I'd be on discussion boards on the internet or trolling, through reenactor unit websites, or just talking to other reenactors and thinking, okay, what can I bring to this event? How can I dial into this event? How can I perfect my impression for this event? Or like, what's the best mindset that I can have going in? But later on, I started to find out that if I looked at other things that weren't World War II German reenactment specific, there was whole other ways of looking at things and whole other mindsets and things that I could do and details that I could hone in on that I was totally missing, that other people maybe had picked up in other contexts, but that carried over. So like a couple of big examples for me was so like American Civil War reenacting is very big here. And it's a lot bigger than World War II reenacting, and it's been around for a lot longer. So I was reading forums from World War II German reenactors, and I'm getting some information and some inspiration. But when I started to look at Civil War reenactment forums, even though I was not a Civil War reenactor, wasn't going to be a Civil War reenactor, there was stuff that these guys were doing that was like on another level, sort of. And it kind of, it carried over into World War II reenacting, and it allowed me to kind of inject something new into World War II reenacting that was different from the narrow definition of how it was that we had always done things. And another example of that is live action role play. Specifically, I found some websites that had people who were making props for live action role play or for role playing games. And these were mostly like fantasy props. They were based on stuff that was in fictional books or in video games, but their approach to prop making, even just like calling these things props and understanding that these are physical objects that help to create an environment or an atmosphere that you're trying to create, it's like a different way of looking at things than how we ordinarily look at things in reenacting. And I found that to be very interesting and very helpful. So, and of course, there's a lot of different examples of this, right? There's a lot of different aspects of hobbies, even like if you're interested in being a rifleman, maybe if you look on like weapons forums that aren't really about World War II reenacting, but you could learn more about the weapons and how they were used over time. Or another thing that I think I might have mentioned before was like bushcrafting, watching YouTube videos where guys show, here's how I created a shelter for myself for one night and was able to be comfortable. Obviously, it's better if you can have some kind of World War II specific documentation of how to set up your bed, how to sleep at night. But just the basics of like, don't set up your tent underneath a big dead tree that could fall over in the night and wipe you out. These are things that you might not find it in a manual because it was maybe common sense back then. But now you might not think of it, and you might find it in some other source, some other way, something not World War II reenactment related, but that you can bring into it and add to it in a way, if that makes any sense.
Definitely. I mean, back in the 30s and 40s, you had city people and woodsman people. So, I mean, but bushcraft is a good skill to have regardless.
I think a lot of people back then, and I could be wrong about this, and someone could pull up statistics and prove me wrong, but like where I live and the society that I'm in, very, very few people have really any outdoors experience or hunting experience. I mean, I think a lot of boys go fishing when they're younger, but few people go hunting or grow up around guns where I live. And I think in earlier decades, earlier centuries, right, the beginning of the 20th century, I think agriculture was kind of bigger in Europe. And I think a lot of people, probably more people than in my area today, grew up knowing how to hunt, or or just even knowing how to stock game if you're living on a farm and there's some kind of predator out there that's attacking your sheep or whatever, right? And so I think that there are skills that most people, or that more people had decades ago, that people now don't have as much. So sometimes just learning about old ways of doing things, even if it's not really specific to World War II, can carry over and be helpful.
Definitely.
The next one that I had is kind of a no-brainer, but I just thought I would throw it in there because this is something that is important to me, which is try to learn the language. Those of us who are reenacting World War II German should try to learn German. And it's hard, and it's time-consuming, and it's challenging. And I'm not going to pretend that I can speak like a native. I make mistakes constantly with things like articles and adjective endings, but being able to read and write German and being able to speak conversational German has really allowed me to take not only my knowledge base, but my skill as a reenactor to a level that would never have been possible if I hadn't put in that effort and time to learn how to do it. I would encourage our listeners, you might be out there thinking, okay, well, I just don't have a knack for it. There's no way. I can't do language. And my reaction to that is like, I mean, you speak your native language, right? You can speak where you're listening to my voice. If you're listening to this, you understand English, you can speak English. Like if you can speak a language, you can speak a language. If you can learn a language, you can learn a new language too. So give it a try. Anything is better than nothing. And maybe understand that you're probably never going to be super fluent in this. But if you can just have enough conversational ability to get across even the basics, never mind the research potential that opens up when you can read this stuff. I mean, it's just there's stuff even just on the internet, right? Never mind archives and stuff. Just if you can read German language websites and forums about World War II, there is so much information that is just, it has never been translated into English. And you could even be the one to translate it into English. The stuff that you find, it'll be amazing. So, I really, really strongly encourage people to, if you're serious about reenacting World War II as a German, give it a try to learn.
Yeah. Even just having a base understanding of language, of the German language, would help a lot. So you don't have the people who say, bring me the Trinkweiser.
Absolutely. The pronunciation is a huge help. And
Yeah, and also knowing that a Trinkwasser isn't a form of can, but it actually means drinking water.
that's one of my pet peeves, and I know I've probably mentioned that before. Calling it a Trinkwasser, it drives me crazy. Yeah, I bought a drinking water, or go fill up a drinking water, or whatever. It's absurd.
Go fill up the
Um,
drinking water with water.
with water for drinking.
Yeah, I mean, in my unit, we have this, like, what you say, base guideline that everything we are to yell in the field is to be in German.
That's great. We basically do the same thing in my group. I printed out a list of commands and common terms. It's maybe just, I don't know how many, maybe 50 terms. And my thought is, if I can teach somebody these 50 terms, there's a combination of single words and phrases. Um, I can give these people commands in the field that they will be able to understand and respond to correctly, even if they themselves aren't fluent in German. Right now, the goal for everybody is, obviously, it should be to be conversational in German, and we're fortunate to have several people in my group who are. Um, but not everybody is. Some people have a more limited skill, but if they can at least understand the commands and respond in the most basic way that's appropriate, that's enough.
One good way of starting to learn a language, like just starting to learn it, would be an app called Duolingo. It covers like the basic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you can figure out how to join a reenactment, if you can figure out how to get the gear that you need and get to a reenactment, you can figure out how to get some kind of very, very basic, bare bones knowledge of the language, and I think even do better than that. So I eventually, what I did was I took adult education classes at a German club in a town near where I live, and I took those classes for many years. And I had previously learned a lot of words, but I didn't have any ability to put those words into sentences until I started to take a class. And the class was just 2 hours a week, but even just having those 2 hours every week where it's like, all right, you're going to focus, you're going to think about this, you're going to learn. And then maybe there was some homework that I usually wouldn't do until right before the next class at the last minute. But even just that, and it wasn't a lot of money, it wasn't a lot of time, and it wasn't a lot of effort, but it really, really, like I say, brought me to a level that would not have been possible for me in reenacting otherwise.
Yeah, and German isn't a difficult language either.
Sure. I mean, it's, I also, I do a World War II Russian impression, and I basically have zero language understanding, which is that's the biggest thing holding me back in that. It's holding me back a lot, right? Like, this is a side impression for me, and it's never going to be what doing German is for me. But I need to at least learn some more words here. And the fact that things are in a different alphabet makes it so hard. Where I need to learn a whole other alphabet before I even really get into learning to being able to read words, right? So it's German
Definitely.
isn't like, yeah, German is much, much easier than it could be for a lot of people. So um,
Not to even
it,
mention that English even has German words in it, like kindergarten and rucksack.
Sure. I mean, so many of our basic root words, even like the word book, like words that people use all the time, like the ground or house. These are kind of the same or very, very similar to German words. So for people who can speak English, German is definitely doable. I promise. So the next thing I had on my list of do's was try out different kinds of events. And what I mean by this is, um, it doesn't mean that you have to love every different type of reenactment that you could go to, but you definitely should give all the different types of events that you can, give them a try. So try some public displays, get out there at events that are held where you're interacting with the public, and do the best job you can and see how you like it. Some people love interacting with the public and some people hate it, but you don't really know. You can't know from reading other people's opinions. You have to try it for yourself. My favorite type of events are unit only immersion events where we're living the life for a day or for a weekend or more, and maybe there's not any kind of a battle. Other people hate that kind of an event because they think that it's boring and they need to have the battle. And still other people like a mix of types of events, like a public event that has a public battle, or even things that are, to me, not so much like a reenactment, right? Like a parade, which we have a lot of reenactment units in America, and in the area where I live, they do parades. And there's a lot of discussion that happens, and I get into this a lot on social media or on the internet, where I'll give my ideas about what's the best kind of event, what's the worst kind of event. But those are just my opinions, and everybody who's chiming in these discussions, they're just giving their opinions. And you're your own person, and your group is going to have its own attitude and mindset. So the only way that you're going to know what you like and what to get out there and do it. And so disregard the get in on the internet chatter if you want, if you share your ideas, your attitudes, but don't knock it till you tried it. That's what I want to tell people.
It's also important to not be that one unit who only goes to public events because you don't want to try anything else, or only go to tactical events because you don't want to try anything else. Get your ass outside your comfort zone and try stuff.
And there's certain types of events that I probably wouldn't do now, I've determined is not a good fit for my unit. But the way that I determined it wasn't a good fit for my unit was that we went to events of that exact type and it didn't work out.
Exactly.
When I started 195, we tried every kind of unit, every kind of event. We tried doing our thing at every kind of event, and there were some types of events that worked out, and there were some that it really didn't work out. But unless we had tried, we wouldn't have known. And I'm not going to say that there is any specific type of event that I'll never do again, because if there's infinite ways to do this, and there could be an event that kind of maybe initially might sound like an event that I would hate, but maybe it's at a site that I would love, or maybe the event offers something new, something different that really appeals to me and that I want to get in on. So I try not to shut the door to anything, really. The next one that I had on the list of do's is to try to promote the World War II reenacting hobby when you can and where you can. And I think some people might have read some things that I've written about this in the past, but I really love World War II reenacting, and I want World War II reenacting to grow. I want World War II reenacting to continue. I want other people to find out about this because I think it's super fun. I think it's the coolest, best hobby that you can do. And I try to tell people that. And I think if you're a reenactor, if you love reenacting, then you get out there however you can and try to encourage other people. Hey, get into this. And maybe you have some friends who are interested in history or interested in World War II, or they're just interested in guns or camping or whatever, right? And maybe they're a candidate for someone that you could convince to join your group. Well, try to get them to come out to an event. Try to get them to see what it's like. And now maybe you don't know anybody, in which case maybe you can promote reenacting by just being on the internet, looking at World War II reenactment groups' websites, maybe giving them a like on Facebook or on Instagram, or leaving a positive comment on a YouTube video, or just putting yourself out there, even if it's not with your own name, right? Even if you have to keep it a secret because you don't want your boss to know that you do this, which I totally relate to and understand. But just make maybe a social media account underneath your reenacting name and get out there and support what other people are doing. Leave positive comments. Say, I'm a reenactor and I think what you're doing is really cool, and just try to do what you can. I think we all kind of owe that to reenacting because someone has to do it, and if you're a reenactor, you should be doing it. What do you think about that, Lasse?
Yeah, I mean, the only way to get the hobby bigger, to get your unit bigger, is to go out and promote the hobby.
Yeah. And even if I do like a lot of promotion stuff and on the internet, and some people have accused me of being like self-promoting, but what I'm really trying to do here is I'm trying to promote World War II reenacting. And it's not so much trying to get more people for my group. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I'd love to have twice as many people as we have now. But if I can post something on the internet and it inspires someone who lives on the other side of the world to contact someone local to them and get started in World War II reenacting, then that's great, and that's mission accomplished for me.
Absolutely. And this podcast is basically promoting the hobby as well.
Sure, I would love it if someone out there is interested in reenacting. Maybe they're not a World War II reenactor, or maybe they don't know about, and if they could listen to this and think, well, this sounds cool. What the stuff they're talking about appeals to me. I mean, I would love that. The next thing that I had on my list was to for the dues is to build a persona, and this is a really big topic, and I don't want to talk about it for too long because I think someday we should do an episode about this. But what part of what reenactment is kind of creating a fictitious alter ego for yourself, where you imagine yourself living in an earlier time and thinking, who would I have been if I lived back then? And what would my background be? And what would my life have been like growing up? And what would my education be? And what would my occupation be? What kind of a job would I have? And it's kind of like a character that you build, that you play, almost a role that you play like an actor.
You actually made this sound so nerdy and geeky.
Well, there's gonna be some more nerd and geek talk in this episode for sure. It sounds cringy, and there's gonna be more of it.
Yeah, I was gonna be really... like, I agree with you. Like, this is very important, but then we were like, just made it sound so geeky.
Yeah, it is a geeky thing. I mean, we're pretending we're doing like a World War II make-believe thing here as grown-ups, and there's no way around it. I mean, it is World War II reenacting is a bunch of nerds playing dress up and pretending to be old-timey people, right? It's like, let's not sugarcoat it. I mean, I don't know, Lasse, I mean, how would you pitch this idea, right? Like, I know that you guys have personas, right? I mean, what's your take on it?
Well, in my unit, it's a requirement to have a persona. Like, it doesn't have to be the most in-depth thing ever, because some people have less imagination than others, but at least like write out some basic background story for your character, the name, where he's from, do some basic research, look at a map of Germany at least. And yeah.
I've done a lot of events in the past where I fill out paperwork for reenactors who go, and I have to fill out this reproduction soldier ID document, the Zoldbuch. And there's nothing I like less than when someone presents themselves to me and I'm starting to fill out a blank book and I say, okay, what's your name? And they say, well, my name is William McMatthews, and it's just like, oh man, like, or worse, it's like, my name is, whatever, right? Like typical American names. And it's just like, and then it's like, what's your place of birth? And they were born in Oshkosh, Wisconsin or whatever. And it's just like...
Yeah, I had that when I was in USA. I filled out a few soul books. Yeah. And I know I just had higher expectations of reenactors in general. But one guy came, sat down, and I was like, hey, what's your name? And he said his real name. And I'm like, oh no, I need your German name for the paper. And he just looked at me.
And these people are missing out.
Yeah, he said, like, just write my name. And I was like, okay. Yeah. And then I was like, so where are you from? And he said, like, wherever in America it was from. And I was like, no. In Germany, your German character in a German uniform. Where's your German character from in Germany? And he said, I don't know, Berlin, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a lot of Zoldbucher like that over time. I mean, if you're that guy right now and you're listening to this podcast, I promise you there's aspects of this hobby that become more sort of, I don't know how to put it really, like more cerebral or like more rich. It adds richness to it if you can say, this is my name and these were my parents and this is the town that I'm from and this is the food that they eat in that town and this is what the weather is like in that town, and and I knew people who had these kind of jobs and my father was from here. I mean, it adds so much. It fills out the uniform. You're not just a cardboard cutout with a uniform on. You're a human being, and you're a human being from who's living in World War II, and it's just way more fun. I promise.
You can even geek out and roleplay actual converged conversations.
All right, well, I'm just going to jump to that because that's on the list too, which is to try first person interactions, which is honestly the like geekiest part, I think, of this whole hobby, right? Which where you're at so for those who don't know, by first person interactions, I mean talking to other reenactors instead of saying, hey, why don't we go to McDonald's after this, and what do you think German soldiers would have done in this position? To speak as if you are a person in 1944 and say, when do you think we're going to be transported to the next sector? Do you think we're going to have to retreat, or are we going to get thrown into an assault or whatever it is, right? Like to just, or even just to have conversations where it's like, man, I really miss certain types of food that I had at home, or like it's been a long time since I heard from my family at home, or our commanding officer is a jerk or whatever, right? Like things that soldiers would have said, things that soldiers would have talked about amongst themselves. It to me, you can look as real as can be, but if you can't like get into the headspace of a soldier in World War II, if you can't at least try to think the way that they might have felt, or to try to feel the way that they might have felt, you're not really reenacting. You're not really living history. In order to really live it, in my opinion, it requires an aspect of make believe, of pretending I'm going to leave my 21st century mindset behind, and I'm going to embrace the thoughts and emotions of the 1940s. And sure, there are people who have tried this, people who I've done it with, who later told me, they said, I was cringing the whole time. That is LARP. That's not what I do. But to me, that's part of the appeal of reenacting. I'll be honest.
Yeah,
And
well, as you first said, try first person interactions. Maybe you'll like it.
Exactly.
It's definitely very hard to do it.
Do you guys do first person very much in your events?
I gotta be honest, it's kind of cringy. But but we
what
do
you
try.
Talk about?
We talk about going to McDonald's after the event.
I knew it. I would. I bet the McDonald's by your events is delicious.
No, I mean, sometimes we do try to do it as much as possible. It definitely gets you in another headspace.
Yeah.
But for me, it is kind of cringy. But I do it anyways because it does actually get you in the different headspace and makes the events more memorable, etc. As well as, yeah, I don't know, it just helps. As I said, we also have a requirement to have a persona. So we'll often dig through that and write secret letters that we distribute during the event. That's an easy way to start first person interactions.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. It sounds really zony. That's like how I got started doing first person years ago. I'll tell you, I did reenactment probably for, I don't know, maybe 6 years before I ever had my first person interaction in a reenactment. In the unit that I joined at the time that I joined, that just never happened. You'd go to the event and you'd talk about reenacting, and you'd talk about history, you'd talk about your life and your job, and there never was any attempt to really do like first person stuff. But once I finally, we had a core of guys who wanted to try it, and we started to do it, and it was hard at first, but it got easier and easier. And now I couldn't imagine not doing that at events. I'm glad I tried.
Definitely.
The next thing on the list is to try to represent what is typical. And this is going to come as a surprise to nobody, right? I mean, that's like,
But I kind of like the look of having my own motorcycle, wearing some goggles on my helmet, having a Schaefer dog in the sidecar. I mean,
yeah,
that's
that's,
typical, isn't it? I
well,
mean, I
sure.
see
Yeah.
pictures all the time of it at other reenactment events, so
Oh,
it's typical, right?
that's the worst. Yeah. And of course, when I say try to represent what's typical, I don't mean what is typical at reenactments, of
Ah,
course.
man!
But the idea here, and this is something that is, I think, all eras of living history and reenactment try to kind of preach the same thing, which is, if you're trying to tell people what life is like in medieval times, it may not make sense for you to pretend to be the king, because that isn't, the way that things were for the king of your country. It wasn't. That's not what it was like for the overwhelming vast majority of regular people. And it's the same thing with World War II. You want to portray whatever it is that you're portraying, try to do what is typical for that. And even if you're portraying a pilot, try to portray like a typical pilot, like one of the many thousands of people who flew planes for the German Luftwaffe, and instead of trying to portray the one guy who was a renegade barnstorming pilot who shot down 50 planes a day and wore a top hat because he was crazy, right? Like it winds up looking cartoonish, it winds up looking cheesy, and it's not good history, and it's not you're not going to be able to interact with other reenactors the way that you can where and that's not to say that you can't do like a specialty impression. I mean, the unit that my unit portrays, the branch that we do, Sicherungs, like this is different from infantry. It's different from what some people might have as an idea of like the bog standard German soldier who's issued, everything for that year or whatever. I think, as I've discussed before, Sicherung units, they used a variety of weapons. They used obsolete weapons and captured weapons. And so we use those. We're trying to portray typical Sicherung soldiers, and not necessarily the typical of the whole German military. But with it, but I wouldn't do a Sicherung impression where we all wear Russian uniforms or something. Like even if I find that some unit did that for some weird reason at some previous time, in some specific instance, it's not good to base a portrayal around that. I think it's more important to portray the typical. And I'm sure that Lasse, you must feel the same way. And I'm sure that the people. This is mostly for people who might be listening that aren't already experienced reenactors. Who just a piece of advice for if you're interested in getting started, you should try to look at typical, common, everyday things that people do.
Definitely. Like you can, if you want a special impression, do that. I myself do a Kriegsbericht impression, but I still try to portray what I see is common and typical of those people or those guys than doing like the one guy with a crusher cap and a cigarette in his hand walking through a muddy trench looking cool.
Right. I'm sure even like with what cameras you use, you can look and see, well, what was a typical camera that a Kriegsbrichter might have used, whether we brought it from home or what they were issued, versus cameras that might have existed and that maybe one guy might have used, but that wasn't like representative of how things were for the photographers.
Yeah, definitely. That's also another aspect of it.
Yeah. We should talk about that sometime too. The whole
Certainly.
impression. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was just the idea of sharing information that you find. To me, that's an ethical thing. Part of the ethics of reenacting is to not hoard information or try to be a gatekeeper, but rather make information available. If I find information that is contrary to a lot of people are doing, the last thing that I want to do is keep that information a secret just so that I can kind of lord over these people and be like, oh, well, you guys are doing it wrong and you don't even know the right way. And I found the right way and I'm not going to tell you, just so that I can seem better than them. Right. And this is something that sadly I've seen happen sometimes. I think it's important, if you get information, put it out there. And even if it's not something that pertains to your impression specifically, if you've got some good information that other people can use, get it to them. Say, hey, I found this photo grouping, or I found this sold book where you can see what was issued, or whatever it is. And I think, like I say, I think as reenactors, we kind of have, I'll say it, I think we have an obligation to share the information that we find. We put a lot of effort into tracking down these obscure facts. And if we can get that information out there, we can kind of add to the historical record, and it adds value to what we do.
Definitely.
And hiding that information away is not the way to.
It has happened a few times that I've discovered some information, and I haven't wanted to. I didn't want to distribute it or share it around at once. I wanted to maybe take some reenactment photos of said discovery to present it better.
Yeah, that I do the same thing, and that's totally reasonable. You want to get that information out there. You want to present that information the best way you can. And hey, if you find some cool information that no one else has, and you can do a photo shoot that presents that better, and at the same time it brings some accolades and some attention to what you're doing, and people say, hey, that's really cool, you figured that out and you guys did it in a spot on way. I mean, that's great, and you deserve that. But there's I think a right way and a wrong way to go about this stuff. So I wanted to say just a couple more things in the do category before we get to the don'ts. So one of those things is to follow your passion. If you get started in reenacting and you join a German Army unit, but you really, 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 your heart, you always wanted to do a German Air Force, a Luftwaffe impression. Go with the unit that you can go with. Do what you can do. But if you find your heart keeps going back to doing Luftwaffe, and you just can't put down books about the Luftwaffe, then dive in. Don't deny yourself doing something that you are really, really passionate about just because no one else is doing it, or just because there aren't events for it. I mean, if you can build something strong enough, if you can build something impressive enough, then you're going to attract attention from other people, and you might find that you're doing something that adds value to events, where event hosts might say, hey, I'd like it if you could come to this event and do this, and do this in your way, and it would add interest or value to the event for other people. So and you might then jump into doing something different and find out, what, this is terrible. It actually doesn't make any sense, and it's not really workable, and it's not really reasonable. And then you can move away from it. But sometimes you really have to try it, to find out if it's going to work or not. It might succeed, it might not, but you've got to try it.
I mean, there's really nothing more to add than what you say. If you don't like where you're at, move.
Yeah. All right, and then the last couple, I would tell people to just network with other reenactors, and that I think kind of goes without saying. If you're listening to this podcast, you have access to information from other reenactors, and that is so valuable. And I will try sometimes to get together in a social way with reenactors who live in my region, even if they're in other units, or they do other impressions, or even to some extent, if they do even other time periods, just to meet with people and kind of pick their brain. Okay, what's your event schedule look like for this year? What are the trends that you see? Where are there opportunities that you see that we could improve, or maybe we could do something different or something new? And I think nobody's on an island. Only guy on your whole continent who is reenacting World War II. You can still find other people who are reenactors, even if they live on the other side of the world, who you can talk to and pick their brain and say, hey, I have a new idea. What do you think about this? And that's so positive and helpful. It's so much easier than just being totally isolated and trying to do something without talking to anybody about it.
To say like that, networking with other reenactors have given me plenty of new friends, lots of new knowledge, got me to some of the most awesome events I've ever been at, and given me a free place to sleep in other countries.
Yeah, that's the best part, maybe, about networking with the reenactors. I don't have the infinite funds of some of our friends where I could go to other countries to reenact all the time, but it's cool to know that. I mean, even just like this podcast, right? Like you and I are on almost opposite sides of the globe right now, and here we are talking about this, which is really cool. And that wouldn't have been possible if you or I had been standoffish and said, "Oh, I've got nothing to gain from talking to someone in a different place who does this stuff."
Yeah, especially those down Americans.
Well, as you know, Lasse, reenactment in America is the best. Anyway, moving on. The very last one. I hope that you have been waiting for me to say this. Everybody out there,
Everybody be quiet. This is
you have
when
got
it
to,
happens.
this is it. You have got to ask your unit. And
No,
of
you need to
course,
say it louder. You need to say it louder.
What I mean by that is you have got to ask your unit. You have got to ask your unit. I'm not even going to say anything about that. Let's move on to the don'ts.
There's one more do.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we got the last do. All right. I'll throw this in there kind of as an afterthought, because it kind of was an afterthought when I was putting together the list, which is...
But it's so important.
It is so important, right? Like, do learn to sew. Learn to sew, and learn to sew, not just to like make like little repairs on your uniforms, but learn how to apply insignia to your field blouse. Practice on that and be able to do that. Learn how to do leather repairs. Learn how to repair stitching on your blown out leather gear. It's way easier than you think that it is. I went probably like 15 years of reenacting or something before I ever tried doing leather stitching. I spent a few minutes watching some YouTube tutorials, and I went to the craft store and I got some thread and a needle for stitching leather, and it has like totally revolutionized my ability to keep my gear maintained. In the past, if my Y straps blew out or something, then I had to wait for the next time that I would see someone who had the skills who could fix this thing, or I'd just buy a new one. And it would be this annoying problem. Now, if I go to an event and something on my tornister fails or something like that, I could fix it at home, or I could fix it at the event. And for the next event, it's ready to go again, maybe better than it was when it was new. And anybody can do that. So
it's definitely easier than you think.
Sure, I'm sure all of this. It seems like, so people at that time, people who grew up during the Great Depression, they had to learn how to mend their own clothes. They had to learn how to darn their socks. A pair of socks had to last you a long time. It wasn't like when your socks got a hole in the toe, you just threw them away. This was something that you would repair over and over until it was totally unserviceable. That's even outside of the World War II context. That's just how life was for a lot of people at that time. Probably most people. So it's totally a period correct skill that is a very, very valuable skill to have in your toolbox. All right. So having said all that, that's the do. Here's the don'ts. So one of my first don't is, don't ever say that your impression is perfect. Don't ever say that your impression is the best impression.
And don't ever say that your impression is done.
Well, it's definitely never done. If you really think your impression is done, like, you're just get out there and buy another book, or get your hands on some archive material and start going through it. And you're gonna find something there, I promise, where it's gonna be like, wow, this is a detail that I never knew about. This is another avenue that I could explore. This is something that I can add to my impression. I've been reenacting I'm coming up on 20 years of doing this. And my current impression is not only not done, not only is it not done or not perfect, it like needs work. Like, I have to buy more stuff. I have to upgrade some things. Still, I mean, after all of this time, I'm still upgrading. I'm still learning. I'm still replacing items with better items, or items that are more dialed into my specific impression. And that's how it's always going to be for everybody. I've never known anybody who had a perfect impression. Even if you had a complete uniform and set of gear, head to toe, that fit you perfectly, that was all named to one guy, and you could say for a fact, this particular soldier was issued this stuff and wore this stuff in this particular day, month, and year. Well, you've got a good set of clothes and gear if you're portraying that specific unit in that specific day. But most of the time in reenacting, you'll find that you're portraying different units at different times, or even if you're portraying only one unit, you're portraying that unit at different times. And that might require changing your boots or a different kind of hat or different type of insignia that was more typical for another time. So you're never, there is no perfect with regards to, and like, as far as saying that it's the best, I mean, it's subjective. Like, I remember one time somebody told me they were going to have the best Volkssturm impression that was ever done. Volkssturm, for people out there who might not know, it was like a late war civilian militia that the Germans used as a sort of to augment the military in the war's final days. And his idea was he was going to have the very, very best Volkssturm impression because every single item that he used was going to be specific to the late war time period that was used, something that was made and issued in the very last days of the war. But the thing is that the Volkssturm had like a low priority in supply, and they probably weren't getting all the brand new stuff that was coming off the assembly line at the time that they were being equipped. So really having all this quote unquote perfect or best late war stuff for a Volkssturm impression was going to create something that I think wasn't typical at all. So, there are different ways to interpret things. There are different approaches, and you could have two totally different approaches that are both equally correct. I mean, look at photos of surrendered Germans in the last days of the war. You've got guys wearing M44 uniforms and gear standing next to guys who are wearing an M36 tunic with jackboots, and these guys are both there. It's both correct for the time period, but it's two very, very different ways to do it. So
unless the Allies brought in a prisoner of war that was captured in 1940 and put him next to the guy with the M44.
Well, it's possible that people could have traveled through space and time, and we don't know for a fact that they didn't have UFO space aliens moving people around. But if we set aside those conspiracy theories, then we just have to realize that a lot of what we think maybe is the best. I use the expression sometimes. I've used this in reenacting old English saying, "How many angels can dance on the head of a pin?" It's a nonsense question. There's no answer. That's how it is with a lot of this stuff. I want to portray a German soldier in 1944. What field blouse should I? What kind of field blouse should I have?
I've never heard of that expression.
It's like an old-timey expression. I think a lot of people probably don't use it. I think, I don't know, someone probably know where this comes from exactly, but I think
we just say how long is a fish.
That's cool. That's a cool one. There's a similar one in English. Some people say, how long is a piece of string? Which is the same type of a thing.
Yeah.
How long is a fish? Exactly. There is no one right answer.
It's also important to remember that for Germans, they never had like the M36 and M40 and M42 designations. For them, everything was a field blouse. Apart from the M44, which was a whole different uniform totally, which they actually called the M44. But all prior were just the field blouse.
Absolutely. They didn't make the differentiations that we make. And I mean, to circle back to like what the most perfect or best Volkssturm impression would be. I mean, you can find photographs of Volkssturm where you got whole units that came from the Reichsbahn, and they're wearing all of their Reichsbahn stuff, and then you've got other whole units that are from a different levy of the Volkssturm, formed at a different place in a different way at a different time, and it's all civilian clothes and fedoras and tweed overcoats, and both of those things are correct, and they couldn't be more different from each other.
Exactly.
So, the next thing on the don't list was don't buy a piece of gear and then try to build an impression around it. And believe me, some of the worst reenactment nightmares I've ever seen in real life have stemmed from this kind of logical folly where it's like the guy got a good deal on a particular hat or a jacket. And he's like, I got this jacket. I'm going to put together this this whole kit around it. And then he's at an event, doesn't make any sense. And he hasn't done it right because he didn't really put in the research in advance. It was more just about buying accessories to go with the hat. And, at the end of the day, it's this embarrassing thing that I'm sure, he'll live to regret someday or whatever. It's just like, I can understand it. You got the deal of a lifetime on a rare type of a reproduction or a post-war hat, and it sounds like you've got an opportunity now to do some cool, unique impression. But
the classic
yeah,
general's visor cap deal.
Oh yeah, I got this great reproduction general's visor cap, so I'm going to buy a whole uniform around it. But of course, the rest of the uniform isn't like a great deal, so you're going to take the cheap way out, buy an East German uniform, and put some, insignia from Pakistan on there, and you look like a clown. Don't do that.
Well, same goes for vehicle owners as well, who are like, well, I got this cool wagon. What's the cheapest way to look like a German soldier?
Well, or worse, I'm a German reenactor, and I got this, American World War II Jeep, right? How can I make this Jeep into like a vehicle that the Germans can use, or like, maybe not even the Jeep, but you just see these people, they've got this one toy, and then they've got to find a way to use it. And maybe it doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's totally wrong for the year that the event happens at, but they've got to use it because that's their toy.
Yeah. They have been a USGI, so they got a live M1 Garand, but they can't afford a K98. So they used the Garand instead.
Sure. All right, Lasse, I have to take a break. I have to go to the bathroom.
All right.
I'm going to come back in 1 minute.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Bum, bum, bum. What? Who's yelling?
I didn't flush it because you were podcasting.
All right, I'm back.
That's the most random shit I've heard.
Yeah, you should put that. Leave that in there.
I didn't flush it because you were podcasting.
Nice. Yeah, well, there was a bit of a surprise there when I went to go take a piss. Anyway.
Awesome.
So, ready? Are you still recording? Are we back on this?
Yeah, I was recording all the time.
You should make a little outcast, a little piece of that for our friends even. Anyway, so next thing that I had listed for a reenactment don't, and this one is a very important don't, that pertains to reenacting, is don't take stuff personally. And,
can I say something on this?
Get in there. Take it away.
I remember when I was a young little kid, maybe 4 years ago. Maybe 5. But I remember I found a group on Facebook called the Help Page. And I had at an event, I had fixed my bread bag with this is something I've seen on originals, especially around the coastal forts around in Norway, where they would apply a little pocket on the outside of the bread bag, often from a splinter material, where they could put their cleaning kit. This later became a feature in the late war M44 bread bag. And I posted this because it was, I thought I was proud. And here comes a guy who's an admin or moderator or something. He's called Chris Pittman or something. And he's like, oh, that stuff never happened. And it's an abomination. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. And I got real worked up. And I took it really personally. I wrote some, passive-aggressive stuff back. And this guy was like, don't take stuff so personally and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to log off.
Yeah, that guy's a jerk.
I don't even know if you remember that, but that was my first meeting with you.
That's so funny. No, see, I don't remember it. And I don't doubt it. but I'm glad that you didn't hold a grudge against me forever, and I really didn't mean it personally. It's part of the thing with the internet is it can be tough, right, with like tone and stuff like that. And there's a really fine line between constructive criticism that's intended to help and just being a jerk. And I struggle sometimes with that, and I'm sure there are people out there who do a much better job of being tactful and considerate than I am. But look, if I've butted heads with a lot of people in this hobby that I regard as very dear friends, and I've had people that there have been times where people really got on my nerves, and I had to kind of take a step back and take a breath and realize, look, there's strong emotions on either side of an issue here, but it's not about me. And I think that that's something that's important to keep in mind.
Definitely.
And I'm sorry I made you feel bad about the bread bag. In real life too, right? Like, if I go to an event, and I mean, I make mistakes at events. There was a real classic one where I just bizarrely kind of fired a blank way too close to a couple of guys in my unit, basically for no reason, without really meaning to, and that engendered some strong negative reactions from the people involved, and and there was some yelling, and I wasn't gonna be like, geez, those guys should have been more understanding. I just made a mistake. Why would they yell at me? It's like, look, like I screwed up. People were mad. People yelled, and I apologized, and everything was fine, and it didn't have to be a big deal afterward. I will not do the negligent discharge again. And now we can all laugh.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes a corollary is that you got to kind of have a thick skin in reenacting, because there's a lot of strong egos, and any kind of hobby like this, any kind of social setting like this is going to have people who want to be the authority, and it's going to have people who don't take kindly to being contradicted, and you just kind of have to, I'm not saying that I'm the best example of this, but try to like rise above it and be better than that. I'm working on that. So next thing on don'ts: disregard information that contradicts your existing ideas. And this was something that I came up with for the list because I was thinking of mistakes I made when I was a new reenactor. And this will be kind of an embarrassing story. Basically, I went to a barracks event, and instead of using gamashin with my low boots, instead of using like the gaiters that wrap around your ankle, I decided to do like this sock roll technique that I had seen maybe in like one original photo, where I had tucked my pants into my socks and then rolled my socks over the tops of my boots. And I thought that this was really cool. And I thought that, I thought it was really cool that I was the only guy doing it. And this was something that I'd seen in the original picture. And then comes a German World War II veteran. He looks at my socks and says, well, that's wrong. He says, maybe that was something that some guys might have done in the field, but they certainly wouldn't have done it in a barracks setting like we're in now. And I kind of wanted to just forget about what he said, because, look, I had seen a photo of a guy doing this, and it wasn't really clear. It could have been in a barracks, and this was just one guy, right? Like, how did he really know what everybody did? But it's like, eventually, I realized he was absolutely right, and this sock roll thing that I thought I was so clever with was something that really wasn't typical in most units. It wasn't typical in the type of unit that I was in. It wasn't correct for the setting that I was in, and I was doing it wrong. And I just kind of should have just swallowed my pride and realized in that moment I'm learning something. And no matter how long you've been reenacting, whether you're a new time reenactor, you can come across information that contradicts how you feel things were, and it can be tempting to just kind of like be like, whatever. But don't do that. Take that stuff to heart. That's something I've learned to be very helpful over time. it's almost like it's even more important to pay attention to information that contradicts how you think things were sometimes than more and more information that just underscores your existing understanding.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. You got to second guess yourself all the time. The next thing on the list of don'ts, don't trust vendor sales pitches. And listen, I say that as a guy, I sell rubber stamps to reenactors. I make rubber stamps that reenactors use to create realistic paperwork. And I have my understandings of how things work with these rubber stamps and everything. But, don't take my word for it, because vendors, whether they're doing this on purpose or not, whether they're doing consciously or not, they're promoting a product that they're trying to sell, and they're trying to make a sale, and they're going to promote it in a way that is going, they hope is going to drive customers to them. And look, I don't make a lot of money on the rubber stamps or anything. It's not about that, but it's in the end of the day, money's changing hands and a product is being exchanged. So find your own answers to this. If you really look closely at vendors' sales pitches on reenactment vendor websites, you're going to find all kinds of contradictory information where they'll say one thing selling one product and then the opposite thing selling another product. Or you'll find information that you can prove for yourself isn't true. So don't use vendor sales pitches as like your primary way of learning about material cultures.
Yeah,
get answers from looking at real stuff.
I've even seen people who do the research on vendor sale pitches.
What do you mean?
Oh, it's like they do something and I'm like, wow, what are you doing? And they're like, I read it on.
Oh yeah, right. Like it's a stand-in for actually learning. It's just taking it. Yeah, and it's bad news. There's some vendors out there that are very, very knowledgeable. There's some vendors out there that do a good job of sharing good information, but like I say, you've got to verify all that information. You got to verify it all yourself. You got to find your own answers. Don't just trust the vendors. Definitely not.
Yeah, I found one vendor right here, a vendor pitch sale pitch.
Oh yeah, what do you got?
He said, they say, we can speak German. We maintain a large collection of original documents for reference.
And I knew it was going to be me.
And we guarantee our work to be free of mistakes. So I mean, although it's true in this case, even though it says it on a website, it doesn't mean it's true.
Well, and after I wrote that, right? So that's on my website. So after I wrote that, somebody made a review much later of some rubber stamps that they had bought. And they said, the rubber stamps were great, the font was great, the text was great, but the border around the circular rubber stamp was too thick. It was thicker than normal. And at first I was like, oh, I scoffed to myself, right? I'm like, oh my God, I copied the border exactly from an original. You're going to tell me it's wrong because I copied this exactly from an original. But then I started thinking about it, and I started looking at my own big collection of original documents. And it's like, you know what? He's right. Like my border was not wrong, but it was heavier than what most of the stamps had for a border around them. And I changed it. And every stamp that I've made after that has had a border that was a little bit thinner than what I used to sell. So, even it just kind of took another set of eyes to point this out.
So in other words, Chris did not try to represent what is typical, and he did take stuff personally.
Yeah, right. There you go. See, part of this is part of all of this stuff is I was thinking, what are mistakes that I've made? And like that's just going to bring me to one of the other things on the don'ts list, which was don't be afraid to admit that you were wrong. And I have been wrong so many times. When I look back, there are still, anyone can find this. You can look on forums that maybe don't get used that much anymore, but that are still online, and just find me as a young reenactor saying some of the most stupid garbage and just literally repeating vendor sales pitches and making every mistake here, dogmatically claiming that one reproduction is the only correct one because of some something that was based on me having looked at a tiny sample of originals that didn't represent the real range of what was produced. You know, it's I'm not infallible, and I certainly have, you know, if anyone out there is people that I argued with and you were right and I was wrong, I apologize. And I'm sure there are some people in that category for sure.
Well, you can never be right about absolutely everything. So it's important to admit when something was wrong. It's like, are you the kind of person that just admits you're wrong, or are you the extreme opposite that actually will edit Wikipedia pages to prove that you were right?
Yeah, don't be that guy. Another don't, and this again is maybe kind of an obvious one, which is just like, don't burn bridges with other units. Don't burn bridges with other reenactors, because you'd be surprised sometimes how long people can exist in this hobby. You might be at an event and there's some guy there who does something really stupid, or he's a clown, and you snap and you're yelling at this guy, you're yelling at his unit commander or something. This is like a worst case scenario. And now you've made an enemy out of that guy. Maybe you've made an enemy out of his unit. You might think, well, I'll never see them again. I mean, you might be seeing this guy every month for the next 15 years of your life. You know, and you might find that this unit that you made enemies out of, maybe they get a really cool event site and they invite all the units in your area to their really cool event, except for you and your unit. And, you know, this, like I say, it's a kind of a worst case scenario, but just it's fine to understand that you're never going to be friends with everybody. And maybe there are units that just have such an incredibly different outlook from your own that you really realize it's never going to be possible for us to coexist. It's never going to be possible for us to work together as a team. But short of that, just try to keep it positive. Try to keep those connections, build those connections, or at the very least, don't burn your bridges with people so that you can never work with them again, because you never know what the future holds. That's another thing I learned the hard way too. Now, Lasse, I mean, you know, have you ever had a situation where you had like a real adversarial relationship with other reenactment groups that you guys were around? I mean, I know that where you live, there aren't really much in the way of other groups, but maybe other European groups.
Not really.
That's good.
Yeah,
I think
I'm glad I haven't been in that issue, but like I've been in that situation outside of reenactment. So it's important to just not necessarily be friendly with everybody, because you can't be friends with everyone, but don't be an asshole.
Yeah, I guess it's basically what you're saying is the key of this is don't be an asshole.
Yeah, if something annoys you, instead of running to like their display or whatever and yell at them, approach them and maybe talk to the unit commander and be like, "Hey, your guy did this and this. I don't like it. Could we maybe work something out?" Instead of
Yeah.
going there and yelling like, "You piece of shit, like get your fucking grip together."
Even worse than that is if you don't say anything at the event, and then before you're even home from the event, you're on in the event group page on Facebook or whatever, being like, these fucking drunk assholes. Yeah, that's the worst you can do.
Yeah, that's really, definitely the worst.
There's no coming back from that. Next don't think you won't ever be bored. And this kind of stems from some recent experience that another reenactor that I talked to was telling me about. Look, not every second of every reenactment is going to be like a first-person shooter video game. And the reality of how things were in World War II was that sometimes it was physically exhausting, and sometimes it was challenging, and sometimes it was a lot of work, and sometimes it was just plain boring. And that's how reenactments can be. And you know, don't let it get you down if there's downtime in between activities and you don't really have anything to do and you're just kind of feeling like, well, what am I doing here? I mean, you know, try to make your own fun, try to be resourceful, or, you know, start writing a letter home, or go through your gear, or, you know, just see if somebody else wants to have a conversation or whatever. You know, you gotta sometimes make, like I say, make your own fun. and understand that this is just part of how life is, and you're not just recreating the most exciting moments of a person's life from 80 years ago. You're trying to recreate what life was like, and it included downtime and sometimes idle time and being bored. And just make the most of your time, but understand that not every second is going to be the street house to house fighting scene from Generation War or whatever.
Yeah, this is very important. A lot of reenactment is pretty much hurry up and wait, and sometimes you can't really do anything else than actually be bored. Quite often we run all night guard duty rotations, so we got like 2 hours. We're just gonna sit on a position and look out to nowhere, and that's 2 extremely boring hours. But you can't do anything else than sit there. Well, you can go home, but
well, if you want to be a baby, but yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I mean, like the boredom in my unit as well. We do guard duty. That's something that was like a major task for the people that we portray, and guard duty is boring, and we're doing something that's historically accurate and authentic and real, and it feels boring, and that's real, and that's part of it. And so we embrace it. I embrace it. Another don't is this is kind of like a very specific one. Don't think that your niche impression is going to blow people's minds and revolutionize the World War II reenacting hobby. And this is like this thing that happens, I think, a lot on the internet where you got to remember, everybody should be aware, World War II reenacting existed for like decades before Facebook was a thing that everybody was on. So just because nobody on Facebook has shown a picture of them in their like extremely obscure civil organization Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform doesn't mean that no one's ever done it before. And I often see this thing where guys who have completed their major impression, their primary impression, they're like, I'm going to put together this side impression where I'm going to do organization tote, like mess kit delivery, pilot, and I'm going to show up at the event and it's going to blow people's minds and people are going to call me a farb until I whip out the documentation. I prove this is a real thing. And, it's going to change the whole dynamic of how people portray or how people perceive mess kit delivery, pilot, repairman, or whatever the heck it is, right? But the reality is that probably somebody has already done it before. And maybe this information or this particular impression or organization or branch is like new to you, but there are going to be people at that event who like knew all about this stuff like way before you ever even heard about it. And if you think that like you're gonna like shock people like and you're gonna have this moment where somebody is going to confront you and you're gonna be able to put the smack down on this guy by showing him a picture in a book of someone wearing the exact same outfit that you're wearing, like that moment of redemption is never really gonna happen. Somebody might think your impression is cool, somebody might think it sucks, people may or may not mention it to you at all, but like don't like get wrapped into this like weird fantasy that you're just gonna be some kind of like mind-blowing superhero of reenactment by portraying some obscure thing. It just doesn't ever work that way ever. I promise.
Yeah, and even though maybe nobody else has actually done your impression, how will it revolutionize the reenactment scene?
Right, like
it just won't.
No, I mean the reenactment scene has existed in whatever form it's existed in for however long, and sure, everything changes all the time. But like, you doing a different impression is not gonna it's not gonna make. I think people think it's gonna make a lot bigger of a splash than it really makes when people do this kind of stuff. And the next one, super obvious, I think, but also super important, is don't take the cheap way out. Reenactment is a hobby that costs money. Like any hobby, you got to put money into it. And things cost what they cost. We talked earlier about boots. Boots are expensive. If you buy cheap boots, they're likely not going to last as long as expensive boots last. They may not be as visibly authentic as other boots that are more expensive. And that's true with like any aspect of your kit or your camp or any aspect of the stuff that you bring. You just have to find a way to budget to buy the stuff that's right for what you're trying to do. And if you try to cut corners, everyone is going to see it, or like people are going to see it. People are going to know that you took the cheap way out, that you did it was a matter of money, you did it to save money, and it's going to create a poor impression.
And even though you do save money, you'll just end up upgrading anyways. So buy nice or buy twice.
Exactly. Now, that's not to say that the most expensive thing is always the best thing. You know, this circles back around to being your own expert so that you can know what the right thing is, whether it's the most expensive thing or whether it's a cheap thing. You know, but if you know that what you need is an expensive thing, but there's a cheap thing that's 50% as good, but and 50% of the price, and you buy that, like that's not going to be a positive way for you to build the items that you need.
There's a guy in my unit. He knows who he is, but he loves to find these obscure manufacturers of World War II items and buy them to maybe save $10 instead of buying something that is like good. And he always ends up buying some weird stuff that doesn't fit him well, looks weird, is bad. So he ends up like paying 3 times what he could have done just by buying the little bit more expensive stuff from the get-go.
I've seen that happen to a lot of people too. There was someone in my old unit that I used to be in who he showed up at an event wearing just terrible, and he was like puffing his chest out proud. I'm like, hey, what is this? And he's like, well, you know that I know you guys told me that I had to buy like the $200 jacket, but like you'll never believe this, but I found a place on eBay that sells those same jackets for $50. And it's like, all right, well, you know, you're not going to be able to use that. You're wearing a polyester thing that looks like a leisure suit, and like, you know, what annoyed me the most about that was the insinuation where it's like, I discovered this obscure source, eBay, you know, maybe you've never heard of it. And it's like, you don't think I knew that there was a $50 crap tunic on eBay? Like, I didn't mention it because I told you where to buy it from, you know, and you by outsmarting me, you've just thrown away $50.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
there's also the kind of the opposite way where maybe something is very cheap and is better than the very much more expensive stuff. Like not just equal, but actually better as well.
That doesn't happen a lot, but it definitely happens sometimes. So I guess we could add as another don't assume that something is the best just because it's the most expensive. You know, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't.
Definitely. Like, let's be real. Most times it is.
Yeah, you're right. Most times you get what you pay. And
But
if all of your kit is the very most expensive thing, then you probably most of your items are going to be great. But yeah, sometimes there are items that are cheaper and, like you say, not just as good but superior.
Yeah, and sometimes maybe the best item is so much more expensive than, say, the second best item, that maybe just buying the second best item can be just as viable.
Yeah, there can be like this thing of diminishing returns. It's like you can buy something for $200 that's 98% correct, right? Or then for $700 you can get one that's 99%. So you're investing another $500 into a 1% difference that maybe most even dedicated enthusiasts aren't even going to be able to discern.
Exactly.
Right? You know, so yeah, it might not be a very wise move.
So again, be your own expert.
Exactly. That's what it really comes. Another don't get frustrated when people don't take hits. And I feel like we talked about this before, but you're shooting blanks at a person, and if you shoot a blank at someone and they don't die, well, that's what happens, right? Like you just can't expect everybody to play fair all the time. You can't expect everybody to know where you are all of the time. And so you know, if you're finding yourself wasting ammo, blasting away at someone who's not falling down in a battle, just maybe walk away. You know, if you're going to get angry and start shouting, that ruins the experience for everybody, and you look like an ass. So, you know, just take a deep breath and move on. Start shooting at someone else, or find another position, or
throw a
fall
rock
back
at
or
him.
whatever. Oh yeah, that's right. Sure, I've seen that. I've seen fist fights. That's another
Really?
don't. Oh yeah, multiple times.
Because of
Multiple
not taking
times.
their hits?
Oh God, yeah, I saw one, and I'm not actually going to. I'm
Oh,
tempted to go into this, but I can't reveal. I don't want to call these people out, so I'm not going to even say the unit involved or the event. But I saw like a GI unit fight a dude and like his dad. Right, it was like an old guy and his son versus like a GI squad. I mean, it was really remarkable. Their unit wound up getting ejected from the event, the guys that started it, and it was drama. And I'm sure that there's still bad blood between those groups today. So, and yeah,
damn.
it all started. I got you, no motherfucker. I got you. I've been shooting at you. We shot you when you were way over there. We've been watching you for half an hour. What the fuck? You know, it's like the worst. So yeah,
Oh, yeah, come on, guys. It's just a hobby.
don't do that. And my very last on the don'ts list, this is a personal pet peeve that some people might not even have seen this happen. Don't use the word repop with a P at the end. The word is a reproduction. And if you want to abbreviate that, you can call it repro. I've seen a lot of guys over the years call things a repop. And I don't understand it because there's not another P in reproduction. So what, you know, like what the heck is this? I don't know. It sounds silly to me. And I just, you know, please stop doing that. Stop saying repop. That's my closing thoughts on the don'ts.
We need to do an episode on pet peeves.
Well, I could go on and on, but I'll tell you, we could call it the repop episode because repop is at the top of my list. I don't know. Have you ever heard people call the Waffenamt or the eagle and swastika, the Reichsadler, the dirty bird?
No.
Oh yeah, I got me a new rifle. It's got the dirty bird. It's like, oh no, please God, stop.
I've never heard that.
There's like a certain type of person who's like smoking a cigar, like sitting behind a table at the gun show or whatever, and you go over there and you're like, oh, can I see this bayonet? Yeah, you know, I gotta get $200 for that. Still got the dirty birds all over it. You know, it's just like, oh, you know what? Forget it. Let's pretend
Dirty
I never
Birds
spoke.
sound like a stupid Nom song.
Yeah, that's another one. So that's what I got. Anything? So that's my little do's and don'ts list for today. You got any more to add to that, Lasse?
Well, I got one on the don't list, and that's for unit commanders, because well, I do a little bit of networking, I should say. So I have a lot of people approaching me and being frustrated after unit commanders and etc. And it seems that some units have a toxic way of leading them, where like many people come to me and complain that their unit won't allow them to like try to incorporate a niche impression. For example, in often cases when they come talking to me is a propaganda company impression, because the unit just don't know how to handle it. And often a good propaganda company impression requires an NCO rank, and they don't allow it because they have their own ranking up system. And like sometimes the unit commanders won't even allow people to do events on their own, to go to like different public shows the unit doesn't even attend, to do propaganda company. And it's just like, to all the unit commanders, like, don't hold on to your unit members like that. A reenactment unit is nothing more than a club. I look at it as a book subscription. If you want to subscribe to more book publishers, then do that.
I totally agree. And in my unit, that's how it is. The people who are in my group are free to join whatever other units they want and do whatever other impressions they want. And the only thing I expect of people is that when they're at an event with us, I mean, first of all, I expect them to tell me if they're going to come to the event so that I can plan for them to be there. And then when they are there, I expect them to be all in for what we want to do. You know, take part in the planning before the event, and when we are there, be a team player. And if that only happens one event a year, and every time I see them they're in some other uniform doing some other impression, that's fine, as long as they're all in for the one event that they are doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I haven't had any problems at all as a result. You know, we've been a unit for I guess more than 5 years now, and in those years, having people having other impressions or falling in with other units has never posed any problem.
Yeah. And woof, woof.
There's a dog. There is a dog in the house. I'll deal with that after the podcast. I don't know how it got in here. Anyway.
And even like when members of my unit approach me as the unit commander and ask like, hey, I kind of want to do this side impression. Is there any way to incorporate it into events? And I'm like, well, sure. I'm sure we can figure something out. Like, don't just say no. Like, try to work stuff out. Try to evolve from like what you are.
Yeah, that's good advice for sure.
And I don't think I have anything else to add. I think all your points are good.
Cool. Yeah, some may be better than others, but something to think about anyway. I could, as I've said before, I could talk about this stuff for hours. I love doing it. But speaking of hours, I think we've blown past our regular time for this. So more work for you editing it, I guess.
New record again.
Awesome. Bonus episode. Maybe after this one we'll start charging people and, you know, finally start raking in the big bucks and we can retire.
The dream. I can live off reenacting.
Sure. All right. I know it's getting late for you, Lasse, so maybe we can call it a night. And I guess I hope you have a nice evening, and I'll see you in the field.
I'll see you in the field as well.
There's the dog again. I gotta go deal with this dog. All right. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.